Before a movement happens, it is first imagined, summoned by the elsewhere. A truthful tongue seeing a new way. A God thundering in the mind, visions remembered. Instead of jails, there is a school where children are listened to. A library of laughter, notebooks scribbled with tender-hearted dreams. Bellies made whole. Instead of homelessness, there is a roof over each worry-filled head, a door that easily opens where we all have a key, affordable memories, love-stitched clothes and earth-affirmed meals. Instead of guns, we face our fears. We resolve our conflicts courageously in conversation. We communicate. We use our hands and heal. The people are taking back their imaginations. A city without sirens, livable wages for the skilled and unskilled, laboring through the sleeplessness, neighborhoods named after rest and collective care. We are the working class poems, premonitions of protest, a promise handwritten from the future. We've already won.
Hello, everyone. There is another way. Welcome, everyone. It felt blues poet and performer Aja Monet's There Is Another Way would be a fitting prelude to our gathering. I hope you agree. Sitting in an auto rickshaw a few days ago, with a package of artworks under my arm to be framed, moving swiftly through Colombo's lunch hour traffic, the rider asked, "The weather has changed, hasn't it?" I distractedly let it slip. It has indeed, so much hostility and loss. For that moment, in my head, the word that played was Mausam, season in Urdu, and derived from the Arabic to mean monsoon time. It has been raining in Colombo. Broadly, climate, Mausam. What is the climate of our days, our nights, our intimacies and estrangement? During the days as we spent together in dialogue, as Pratik and Priyanka have already introduced, at the 13th edition of Experimenter Curators Hub, I'm hopeful we can compose a microclimate of attuned listening and mutuality. This forum has endeavored to be a space where curatorial and artistic stakeholders jointly address methodologies that extend from the arc of living, social bonds, and the exhibition as language, where we debate infrastructural loopholes and how to house ideas in the absence of inclusive cultural infrastructures. In a moment of amplified polarization, racist ousting, gaslighting of those who rise in dissent, and the threat of deportations and mass displacements as imperial war machines and corporate power go on destructive rampages. As malice is planted where tenderness once grew, it is impossible to address any creative quest without awareness of this passage and its debilitation. At ECH, we have addressed ways of trespassing genre boundaries, collective affinities, remedial actions, and lines of difference. In my role at this platform for the 10th occasion, I find it crucial to restate that we are neither aiming for these conversations to be prescriptive, deliver consensus, nor sterile solutions to feed the art market, but rather to revel in learning by doing, in knowing art is a risky business in the best sense, and thus take seriously what it means to release a body of knowledge that is open in a troubled world. With our participants who arrive from different corners of the world, they have vastly different settings in which their slow accrual of knowledge holding has happened, where they have built enduring relationships with artists and organizers in the broadest sense, where they have archived material cultures and so-called intangible heritage, as well as where they have encouraged moving away from scopic regimes into less dominant modes of sensing artistic currents and wilder thought horizons. These days, we are seeing the slow cultural work of many years is facing erasure, redaction, and isolation at lightning speed. Let us think, therefore, of the pace and the shape of what we do. What it might still mean to take up curatorial forays as paths that are made by walking into unknown and asynchronous currents. Borrowing from Teju Cole, what compels us to evoke the overspilling world as a way of being stirred by and fighting for radical love, as a way of observing how categorizations are both framed and unframed around who is the least of all equals. A hierarchy of suffering that is constituted when a group that has been decreed to be outside the sanctified universe of obligation, that circle of people with reciprocal obligations to protect each other, as historical sociologist and pioneer of genocide studies Helen Fine wrote. In the concluding remarks of ECH 2020, I quoted from Anne Boyer's phenomenal literary work, The Undying, a meditation on modern illness. We continued the hub during pandemic time. Many of you all joined us online. And these lines resonate again, where she wrote, "The history of illness is not the history of medicine. It is the history of the world. And the history of having a body could well be the history of what is done to most of us in the interest of the few." I'm turning to her again in consideration of these lines, syncing with calls for ceasefire, for restoration of collective dignity, and sense-making in the face of growing annihilation and weaponization. Boyer recently wrote, and I'm quoting a fragment from what is available as her statement online, I have resigned as poetry editor of the New York Times Magazine because our status quo is self-expression. Sometimes the most effective mode of protest for artists is to refuse. I can't write about poetry amidst the reasonable tones of those who aim to acclimatize us to this unreasonable suffering. No more ghoulish euphemisms, no more verbally sanitized hellscapes, no more warmongering lies. If this resignation leaves a hole in the news the size of poetry, then that is the true shape of the present. As spiraling losses and resignations arrive each morning like the rain clouds, I reread this final sentence as an aesthetic provocation that is not signaling finitude, but fiercer and freer imagination, the true shape of the present as a hole in the news, the size of poetry. What we are tasked with may feel onerous and raise cognitive dissonance, but there is no place for callousness, apathy, or cynicism. Artistic and curatorial undertakings as call and response to this present will not recede. They will continue to resound beyond schemes of control, announce and pronounce truths, stir adjacency, and fold into the multitonal realities we cohabit. I would like to consider this initiation into Experimenter Curators Hub as a personal homage to visionaries who have left this plane of life during 2023. Some of these at a very personal and local level are artist and curator Dr. Kavita Singh, who was my teacher at JNU and brought me into curating. She participated at the Hub in 2018. And Vivan Sundaram, artist and cultural organizer, who has been, again, a loving mentor to many of us. And most recently, B.N. Goswami, who is remembered as a vast oasis of historical wisdom on India's cultural, syncretic, and civilizational pasts. He was also Dr. Kavita Singh's mentor. So we are not losing just teachers, but teachers of teachers. And here in Calcutta, and especially at the Hub, the loss of art critic Rita Datta leaves an immense void, because she was the first to sit in that row in the corner and ask us questions. We are bereft of these elders who have anchored many of us in creative thought, allyship, and public histories. They leave a robust intellectual inheritance, a spirit rekindled by plurality, and for us to do the work in a horizon for ethical responsibility to prevail. Thank you. I'm very glad to introduce our first speaker, Natalie King, who, as Priyanka said, is joining us from Melbourne. She is an Australian curator, writer, and professor of visual arts at Victorian College of the Arts and University of Melbourne. We have had the wonderful occasion of witnessing many of her projects, as she has very strong ties to South Asian artists. That will also continue with her work in Kathmandu in Nepal as part of the Triennale, most recently announced. Her projects also include the curation of Yuki Kehara Paradise Camp, the Aotearoa New Zealand Pavilion at the 59th Venice Biennale. We're going to hear about this project today. As well as her other projects that include Reversible Destiny, Australian and Japanese contemporary photography at the Tokyo Photographic Art Museum. Some of her other work has included long-term collaborations with artists such as Destiny Deacon. She also worked with Tracy Moffat in My Horizon Australian Pavilion at the 59th Venice Biennale. She has curated exhibitions at Singapore Art Museum, the Osaka National Museum of Art, National Gallery of Indonesia, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney, among others. She has always maintained a focus on indigeneity, intersectionality, and feminisms. She is also president of ICA Australia and was awarded the Medal of the Order of Australia for service to the contemporary visual arts. Welcome, Natalie.
Thank you, Natasha, for your warm introduction and for your very poetic invocation setting the scene for today's hub. I'd particularly like to thank Priyanka and Pratik for inviting me to the hub, a platform I've long admired from afar, and I've been working my way through the very impressive archive. I'm thrilled to be here amongst esteemed colleagues, friends and comrades, although I have the somewhat daunting task of going first. It's my first time in Kolkata, and it's a really dazzling city. I'm struck by the volubility, the sound of the city. It's very audible, and the numerous booksellers that populate the streetscape. So it's great to be here, and thanks to the Australian Consulate for joining us today. So what I wanted to do today is discuss the kind of curatorial modality that I use. I've been curating for about 25 years, and I've been thinking recently, as have many curators, about the role of care. And I see care as a really integral curatorial methodology that I use. So it's less about roles for me, it's more about relationships, interdependencies, conversations, and collaborations rather than specific roles. And for me, this paradigm of care is very much a horizontal structure, and it's relational, with coexistence as a central point. These ideas of care also relate to kinship and are important to the First Peoples of Australia. I live and work in Melbourne, in Naarm, and I pay my respects to the Boonwurrung and the Wurundjeri people of the East Kulin Nation, and I honour their ancestors and elders, past, present and emerging. So for me, modes of care become a pattern of practice and a methodology. And today I want to weave together some accounts of friendships, frustrations, recollections and recursions, anecdotes and afterlives. So many of you will know that the etymology of the word curator comes from the verb curare, which means to take care, and this has been a very active discourse, the role of care, over the past few years. So the word derives from the Latin word curatus, the past participle of the verb curare, which is defined as to take care. In the late 14th century, in medieval Latin, curatus was defined as one responsible for the care of souls, so that the term had a spiritual inflection and ecclesiastical responsibility. In Italian, the verb curare also means to take care or cure someone of their illness, to look after, to serve, even heal. So this etymological entanglement between care and curating foregrounds the working relationship between artist and curator. And urging for greater care, I frequently return to the relationality of curatorial practice beyond the care of objects in a museum. Next slide. So from 1362, the term curator was used to signify people who care for minors or lunatics. And in 1661, it began to denote one in charge of a museum, a library, a zoo, or other place to exhibit. While the Latin word cura, or care, was specific to the display of objects, contemporary curators deploy care and concern for their projects and participants. And now I turn to a colleague and Sami scholar, Lisa Ravna Finnborg, who writes about indigenous knowledge and systems, epistemologies of care within kinship. And she says, our ethical entanglements with the world and our relationships with human and non-human others over time. Instead of considering care as a provision to someone who has a lack, we can think about care as ontological, relating to all beings and practices. So for me, curating is not about necessarily exhibition making. All forms have equal merit, whether it's a meeting, an activity, a colloquium like this, a gathering, a conversation. But the role of care is fundamental to the way that I work. Next slide. Oh, okay, keep this one. So here are some provocations that I thought we might like to consider during the next few days about care as a modality, the role of ongoing care in times of crises, the role of care as a foundational network, and also the potential asymmetries of care. Next slide. Oh, there's one before here. Just go back, there should be... Oh, okay. Right, this one's fine. Next slide. Okay. Yeah. So I wanted to share with you today my curation of Yuki Kihara for the Aotearoa New Zealand Pavilion at the Venice Biennale last year. The exhibition is currently on display in Sydney till December 31st. Yuki was the first Pacifica, transgender, Indigenous and Asian artist to be selected by New Zealand. New Zealand put out an open call in May 2019, and I reached out to Yuki somewhat timidly, and with some persistence she agreed to form a duo with me because the call out was requesting an artist-curated duo. We had not worked together previously, but I had certainly been aware that she had had a solo acquisitive exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York in 2008. She had participated in the biennales of Honolulu, Bangkok, Sakahan, and I'd seen her work at the Asia Pacific Triennial. She had also visited the university where I work and given a lunchtime lecture, and we had dinner that evening. So that was really my kind of brief relationship with her, but I had longed to work with her ever since. So we started I guess an online communication and decided to put in a joint submission. We had 5 weeks for the submission, and it was enormously arduous. You had to put in a full freight quote, customs clearance, global distribution plan for your catalogue. A very, very detailed submission was required. But fortunately, I had previously curated Tracy Moffat in 2017 in the Australian Pavilion, so I had a sense of kind of the requirements of producing a Venice Biennale, which is unremitting, exhilarating, exhausting, as many of us know, but really thrilling for an artist. It's kind of like the apex. So we started working together, and the gift for me was that when I approached Yuki, she had a fully developed concept that had been percolating for 5 years. So this was a total gift. She had a title, she had a concept, she had budgeted various elements, and what she wanted to do was return the male, white, European gaze of Paul Gauguin and inflect his imagery with the Fafa Fine or third gender community. Next image. So here's a bit of behind the scenes in Venice. It's a very complex environment to produce an exhibition because, as you know, the city is on water, it's complicated to deliver your crates. There's over 90 countries participating in the Biennale in Venice, with around 39 countries who have permanent pavilions in the Giardini. Other countries are in the Arsenale, and other countries find rental pavilions. New Zealand doesn't have a permanent pavilion, so in many ways this was an opportunity to find and secure a space that would be amenable to Yuki's practice. We worked very hard with our typography and our visual graphics, and the typography very much has a Polynesian sensibility. We worked with the graphics of the former Samoa, New Zealand typographer Joseph Churchwood, and we also used a patterning which relates to the traditional bark cloth, which is called siapo. Next slide. So where is Samoa? Samoa is in Oceania. It has a population of about 200,000, and I like to turn to Apeli Ho'afu's, the Tongan writer's very key text called Our Sea of Islands, where he writes about the joy of Oceania and the largesse. So he doesn't see it in terms of small islands, he sees it in terms of abundance and largesse. So I was fortunate to spend time in the island, predominantly in Apia and Upolu Island, as part of the photo shoot. Yuki Kihara works very much like a cinematographer on location, from kind of plantations to churches, waterfalls. She scouts for locations, and she scales up with a very large crew of hair and makeup, lighting, photographer. So we were on location in the jungle for about a week, and I thought I'd share with you a clip about the Fafa Fine community, which is a culturally recognised but not a legally recognised third gender community in Samoa.
Myself as a woman who's stuck in a different body, not wrong body, but it's a different body. Sana. Fitsu malindi. So, Western society is trying to fit us under a box. Like they try to put us under gay, put us under lesbian, trans, sorry, and all other, the queer and all that concepts. But I think Fa'afafine is our cultural identity.
The Fa'afafine often have caring roles in Samoan society. Many are nurses and midwives, and many were involved in the rescue work following on from the 2009 tsunami. So Yuki Kihara, as I mentioned before, in 2008 had a solo exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and it was there that she saw for the first time the paintings of post-impressionist Paul Gauguin. And looking at these images, she wondered, could Paul Gauguin have in fact been looking at the Fa'afafine or the transgender community? And therefore, could these paintings be an early form of Polynesian queer image making? So Yuki's practice is very much research-based, and she went through the visitors book of Auckland Art Gallery and discovered that in fact Paul Gauguin had visited Auckland on his way to Tahiti and the Marquesas, and had done some sketches of Maori totems that you can see on the right from his journal Noa Noa. Next. So here's some images from the photo shoot. There was an extensive casting, and what Yuki did for Paradise Camp was she upcycled and repurposed select paintings by Paul Gauguin produced in the Marquesas and Tahiti that resemble parts of the island of Samoa, and rendered them as photographs and cast the images with the Fa'afafine community. Next image. So here we are on location in the jungle. We developed a kind of a centre where everyone met and worked out our plans for the day. Some of the shoots were at dawn to capture the light, and you can see wardrobe, hair and makeup. There was actively getting permission from traditional landowners and chiefs, and this shows kind of the behind-the-scenes production. So here's where you can see the uncanny resemblance of how Yuki's repurposed an image by Paul Gauguin called Three Tahitians and rendered it as Three Fa'afafine. So it's, I guess, a very daring and irreverent returning of the white male colonial gaze from a Samoan perspective. My name is Natalie King. I'm a curator based in Melbourne, and I'm really thrilled to be working with an artist like Yuki, who is immeasurably creative, habitually outspoken, very politicised and socially engaged artist who is working with many communities here in Samoa to produce a new body of work for Venice.
My new body of work that's going to be shown at the Venice Biennale is entitled Paradise Camp. Paradise Camp was inspired by an essay that was written by Ngāhuia Te Kotoku, who described how some of the models in Paul Gauguin's paintings may have been Mahu. I also looked at the paintings of Paul Gauguin on the occasion of my solo exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York in 2008, and then realized that the models in the painting not only looked Samoan, but they also looked Fa'afafine. Hence why we have Samoan Fa'afafine models
Upcycling Paul Gauguin paintings.
as a way to critique the colonial heteronormative gaze from an indigenous perspective. Paradise Camp has been 8 years in the making. The process involved a series of consultations with members of my Ainga, traditional landowners, the government, and the Fa'afafine and Fa'atama community in Samoa. Gaining the support of the local community helped to stage a high-level production which featured over 35 cast and 20 crew members based locally. The photo shoot took place in some of the most beautiful locations across Upolu Island that are currently under threat by the impact of climate change. Paradise Camp is the most ambitious project to date in my art practice.
Paradise Camp. Paradise Camp.
I hope you like the soundtrack. We commissioned our own music. Here's some more examples of Paul Gauguin's two women, and Tanya and Lucina, who are an auntie and a niece, who are cast in this particular image. And Tanya is renowned for starting the beauty pageants in Samoa, which are a theatrical community event held every year on the island. Here's two Fa'afafine going to church. Next. And this is When Will You Marry, Paul Gauguin's version, and then Yuki's. Next. Yuki was looking for a husband or Prince Charming in Venice, but I think she's still looking. Next. Here is the installation in Venice. Some of you might have had an opportunity to see the exhibition in the Arsenale. We wallpapered the walls with floor-to-ceiling Siapo pattern that was designed by Yuki, inspired by her late teacher, Sylvia Hanipale. Their ancestors, commemorative images of ancestors on the left. Next. And here's an installation shot of the photographs against a vast image of an oceanscape that looks like paradise, would be the kind of image you would have on a screensaver, but in fact it's the site where the tsunami took place. And you can see a small island, an islet on the far right-hand side. This was formerly a leper colony, so the oceanscape is very much imbued with the impact of climate change and coastal erosion. Here are some images that we included in a section called the archive. It was interesting for me as a curator that Yuki had very much a research methodology. Artists often have archives, but they're somewhat haphazard and there's no system to them. So I thought it'd be interesting to include some of this early material and representations of the Fa'afafine community in the exhibition in what we called the Varchive. Va means the space between, it's a Polynesian word, and also in the publication. Next. So here's the publication. So this is one of the things that I was able to produce. In some ways, COVID gave me an extra year to do all the commissioning. Most of the contributors are Maori and Polynesian. So there's poems, short essays, annotated images by Yuki, and it's a publication that is very much a hybrid of a catalogue and a monograph, because Yuki didn't have a monograph. So there are some essays in the publication that deal with works other than Paradise Camp. So hopefully the publication has an afterlife beyond the exhibition cycle. Here are some quotes. I tried to make sure that there was very strong voices from Polynesia in the publication, and you'll see that some of these quotes were also used in the exhibition display. Venice, because Venice was on for a 7-month exhibition cycle, we decided to bring some critical discourse to Yuki's practice, given that she's looking at intersectionality, indigeneity, and climate crisis. And we called this event Talanoa Forum, and it was held in partnership with Ka Foscari University of Venice in person and online. And Talanoa, next slide, is a Pan-Pacific word that means open and transparent dialogue. It's a way of relating in the Pacific it's very much a non-hierarchical way. So we use this kind of modality for our Talanoa Forum. Next. The other thing that we started, which Shubigi was part of, it struck me from curating the Venice Biennale in 2017, is that curators, and it's very, about nationhood, and curators seem to work in these silos of non-disclosure. I kind of never met anyone. There was no opportunities to share knowledge, to share learnings, even to share a ladder or equipment. So with Shubigi and other colleagues, we developed a network, and we met online just to ask, how are you handling the Venice Biennale, the La Biennale logo, or, have you been able to get your freight consignment out of customs? And also, how are you feeling? It's very much a pressurized situation for an artist. So this network, I think, was very useful, and we also did a Talanoa forum online, which Shubigi is part of. Next. So Paradise Camp is currently on display in Sydney, and Yuki and I worked really from the outset to think about what might happen after Venice. Venice is like an apex for an artist, and I've seen the feverish quality it induces, but also to think about, if you're an artist, you have a practice that's ongoing. You have to have longevity. So we wanted to think about what might transpire post-Venice. And it was important for both of us for the exhibition to return to the Global South, and in particular to Sydney. So in Sydney, I re-curated the exhibition. I'm kind of not that interested in touring exhibitions. And Yuki was able to do an 8-week residency in Sydney, look at the collection of colonial photographs, and produce some new work. Next. And the new work was realised in August. It was called Bertha, so I re-curated and reconfigured a central section of the exhibition. And Bertha, or Harold Samu, is a very well-known Sydney-based Samoan drag queen who has been very active in the HIV space. And what Yuki did, which was, I think, brilliant, is that Yuki told Bertha's life through her drag costumes. So she obtained miniature Pacific dolls and worked with the couturier to make costumes that represent Bertha at the Sydney Opera House, at an AIDS event, and then we presented them in Sydney with, of course, Bertha in her full regalia doing a performance. wanted to also show you that we did a Talanoa forum in Sydney, and in some ways it was very much like the hub, kind of dismantling the formalities of a conference. So we invited Cindy of Samoa, the most well-known drag queen, to open the forum every day, and she performed as Tina Turner. So just press play. And then
Good to be with you. It's my favorite day. I can wait till
so it was a really kind of irreverent way to start a conference, and I got my university to pay for it. Next. So in the last 5 minutes, I just wanted to quickly share with you probably my most enduring curatorial relationship with the Indigenous artist Destiny Deacon. In some ways, we're a bit like Daisy and Heather. We're an unlikely match, but you know, it's taken me a long time to understand her process and practice, mode and medium since 1994. Next. Earlier this year, I worked with Destiny to help her for her project on the Sharjah Biennial. I thought it'd be interesting to show this given Natasha's working in Sharjah. And Destiny was assigned an old Arabic house that had been completely restored. So I worked to support her to realise her work. The little clip is a work called Runner, and his name's Otis, and he's, let's see, he just stole a Louis Vuitton bag. Okay, next. So we wanted to work with the architecture of the space. There were these niches which we inserted some political images. Destiny's from an activist family. Her mother started the first Aboriginal women's refuge in Melbourne, and that's an image of her grandmother on the right. And Destiny tends to work with dolls, black dolls that she finds, partly because she feels sorry for them. She rescues them, and she says people are too hard to work with. Next image. So I just wanted to finish by sharing some really exciting news. Yesterday it was announced that I've been appointed with Sujan Chitrakar as the co-artistic director of the Kathmandu Triennale in February 2026. You're all invited. And some of my thinking about coexistence and care, sharing and belonging will be a key element of our curatorial concept. Thank you. See?
Thank you so much, Natalie, for sharing from these projects, these relationships with artists, and for grounding their approaches in this way that also reaches us sensorially in the room, especially because I think for many practitioners, Venice is in fact maybe not the center of their cultural experiences, and yet like your projects have shown, it's also there's a way to disperse and decentralize that experience into the kinds of everyday aesthetic conditions of the artists that you work with. I think that precise sort of longevity and dispersal is perhaps what also within this space can be thought of critically but also in an appreciative sort of way for us, where biennial making is something that as a temporality needs to perhaps be felt on an ongoing basis and not as this sort of one-time event, but really to think of its sustainability. And so I sort of wondered, since you have worked on other such festivals, biennials, not only in Venice, but also within Australia, I also wondered if you would like to draw on those experiences. And of course, in Kathmandu, you will have a very different infrastructure, very different artist conversations, regional conversations.
I guess I always return to the text by Raqs Media Collective, Earthworms Dancing, Notes Towards a Biennial in Slow Motion. I think that's the citation. And they write very eloquently about a biennial that happens over time rather than in time. So how can we think about the biennial, not just that high intensity moment, but the arc of time and the arc of relationships? So I guess that's something that we're thinking about for the Kathmandu Triennale, and Sharera's here. It's a particular moment in the cycle of the Kathmandu Triennale, and we're hoping to build a modality that is sustainable, because in my experience with biennales and triennales, kind of one team leaves and then the next team arrives, and what are the handovers, what are the learnings, what are the anecdotes, what are the troubles, and how can we share that knowledge and unlearn kind of the glamour of a biennale and think about a more sustainable model that is inclusive as well.
Perhaps we can talk more as well about Destiny Deacon, since you came to her at the very end. She's been a pioneer for many practitioners in Australia, in the education context and in the activist context, as you sort of started to share. I wonder if you'd want to draw further links into how her practice addresses indigenous dispossession, racial violence within the Australian context, but also intergenerational lessons in activism. And I know in certain projects she also comes into your space of family in the ways that the collaboration literally also includes members of your family and your close circle.
I'm impressed with your research, Natasha. So Destiny and I have been working together since 1994, and I was fortunate to curate her survey exhibition, Walk and Don't Look Black, at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney. And at that point, Destiny had 2 slides in a shopping bag under her bed. She just had no archival material, and for about 2 years she sat at my kitchen table and we went through her CV and we started assembling her history of images, image making, the writings about her, and we formulated a very deep friendship, such that when I had my 3rd child, I heard this little voice on the end of the phone: "Natalie, I've got an opening in 3 days in Sydney. Can you bring your baby over?" So, of course I did. The thing with Destiny is, and Inti, maybe you shouldn't listen to this because you're curating her into the next Biennale, her work happens quickly, but at the end. And I know, don't worry. Her phrase is, she'll be right on the night, and you have to trust her. The thinking goes on for so long, but the making's quick. So over I went with my son. She put a hood on him, a hood on the dolls. She made a film, she made photographs. They were outputted the next day and taken up to Sydney as hand luggage. And the show was a sellout. So, her mode is swift at the end, but the thinking takes a long time. And I guess I like to think about the solidarity and difference and the female friendship and feminism that we have between us, because we're different ages, we come from very different cultural backgrounds, but there's an interdependency and a reliance. Destiny is also known for, I guess, using the word black, B-L-A-K, as an activist term. And she says she took the C out of black and reclaimed that term. So many Indigenous and First Nations artists use the term black, like Tony Elwood, and she really kind of packs a punch. She's very, very funny. So that's the other thing about Destiny is kind of her levity and her humour, and her works are sad and pathetic, but they're also really funny.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up that reference, since we also had Brooke Andrew here last edition, and he spoke about the term in terms of black core and what that means also to bring together a kind of planetary solidarity among younger and older Indigenous First Nations practitioners. I'd like to also hear, from you personally, what it means to carry the weight of the recent news in Australia, where more than 60% of Australians voted no in the landmark referendum. And just, since you have relationships with those who have been waiting for that recognition, especially Torres Strait Island people, but also the communities at large. And I also was reading recently more the poetry of Lisa Belair. I don't know if I'm pronouncing.
Lisa Belair, yes.
Who's very important in the Melbourne context as an activist and poet. She has this really strong poem called Final Warning, and I couldn't help but think that so many such warnings in poetry and resistance have been made to really finally have that acknowledgement on the land for the people. So I wonder how the artistic community is also reacting to this.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned Lisa Belair, because Lisa used to live with Destiny, and during my early visits was always a key feature of Hope Street in Brunswick. And Lisa sadly and suddenly passed away during NAIDOC week, which is an important Aboriginal week, and she was like Destiny's sister, an incredible poet, activist. She would photograph all different occasions in Destiny's life. But in terms of the referendum, look, it's hard to know what to say, except it's really tragic and we've got to do better. There was very strong lobbying from our Indigenous leaders and elders, such as Marcia Langton, but there were also divisions within the community, as there are divisions now globally, and I think the divisions became more and more entrenched and the referendum didn't progress. However, most institutions do an acknowledgement to country, do a proper welcome to country with a smoking ceremony. I mean, Inti, you'll have that when you open the Biennale of Sydney with a smoking ceremony. So there are very important gestures within the community. Most organisations have a reconciliation action plan. We certainly do at the university. So there are steps being made, but we've got to do better. All of us have to do better to care for each other and to recognise the precious voices of our First Peoples and their ancestral knowledge.
Thank you for that. Before opening up, I just have one more question. So yeah, please keep your questions ready, and we pass on the microphone to those of you who have the wish to engage at this point. I also was struck by what you shared in terms of reading the ocean as a space, of course, through Yuki's practice, as a space of forced transit, of indenture, of sickness, and also, of course, of the tsunami. And since this is an area also that I'm very personally invested in, to sort of think through oceanic relationalities, but also very much this aspect of what happens in forms of incarceration and sickness as well, in relationship to particularly these very romanticized understandings of the ocean, the so-called Indian Ocean, but also the many names in which this water is addressed. Luli Eshraghi is also someone who has been with us at the Hub and brought in really important perspectives that can anchor our relationship to salt water. And I wonder if you want to maybe bring that up more, if there are other practitioners
sure.
who are key for
So
you.
I probably didn't get time to mention, but at the Powerhouse in Sydney, we realised a new work by Yuki called Moana Rising, and it's a floor work which captures the rising sea levels in Samoa and the archipelago. So you can literally walk into and feel the impact of sea level rising. And in December, I've co-edited a journal called Lagoonscapes that comes out of Ca' Foscari University of Venice. It's an open access, double-blind, peer-reviewed journal that you can all access, where Apeli Ho'afu's key text from 1994, Our Sea of Islands, will be reprinted with some respondents. And we've asked various Polynesian and Pacifica writers to think about the Moana, which is the Pacific, from a distinctly Pacifica perspective in a Venetian lagoon context.
Any questions? If you would like to share your name and stand, that would be great,
thank you.
so we can catch you on the live stream.
Hello. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. And thanks to Natasha and Natalia, both of you, for giving a great presentation to us. Myself is Debuyuti Roy. I'm an artist. I have been selected for the national this year also. And my artworks are going to get curated in Redford by the NGMA. So anyway, I have also written a recent book on Jogen Chosri's like the dot that moved, or like that. Anyway, but let's come to the context right now. Now, I have been worrying about what's wrong with the humans, like for years after years. Like we are trying to reserve for the minority classes or the third genders every time. And I'm really concerned about one thing, that what is the public acceptance rate of that? Because we're talking in a very niche market about this, and these panels are it's for the people, I think only for the 2 or 3 or 5% of the community we live in. So if you go by the history also, I'm really concerned, if you find that when the slavery was in the practice in the 1790s and all that, William Blake is writing a poetry called Song of Loss, and he's concerned about the slavery system, and he was talking about that, and the intertextual relationship is coming when Rabindranath Tagore is writing on a poetry on Africa. So have you studied on that how the public acceptance are happening for this type of art movements that you are making?
Is the question, what is the acceptance of the trans third gender community in Samoa?
No, yeah, when you are taking art of these transgenders or on some of the third gender, then I'm asking the question that what is the public acceptance of that? And is it is it not making another taboo to them, when you are targeting a particular community in that sense?
I didn't see the project as targeting a community. It was celebrating a community and giving back and empowering the community. And in terms of audiences, we had nearly 500,000 people saw the exhibition in Venice. It was profiled on CNN, many sort of general publications, Financial Times, The Guardian. But most importantly, the project was made by Yuki for her community, and it will return to Samoa in June next year, to the site where we made most of the work. So the exhibition in some ways comes full circle and will return and empower the community. One of the other criteria that Yuki has when she shows her work is that there are all gender bathrooms, and that's her way of making sure that there is acceptance of the trans and third gender community.
Thank you.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, thank you.
I'm Nondita, and I probably should frame this a bit better, but let me see if you get what I'm asking. So, number one, did both the people Yuki and Destiny reach out to you, or did you reach out to them? I'm asking you this because if they reached out to you to produce these shows, they must have felt a certain comfort or expectation of understanding from you. And I just want to understand, what is it in your work or your kind of the message that went to them that makes them feel comfortable? Because I think that's where, say, majority like us fail people. So you've probably got something right, and it'll be nice if you can share that with us, because that's really practical learning. Now, I'm sure I've confused you.
No, not at all. I guess what I was trying to communicate is the role of trust and care in the way that I work with artists. So I try to, where possible, make sure an artist is properly resourced, understood, cared for, looked after, but it depends on each case. So for example, with Tracy Moffat in the 2017 Venice Biennale, the gift I could give Tracy was time, because I didn't realise that she spends 3 months with post-production on one image. So only she could make the work. And so what I did was I just removed all the correspondence and all the white noise around it. If anyone needed anything, they had to come to me. So I needed to make sure that she had as much time as possible in her studio. So that's what I realised I could give her. Yuki was a different case. We did a lot of fundraising. We had to work out what kind of support network she needed around her. We made sure that members of the Fa'afafine community travelled to Venice on a number of occasions, and that also Yuki could spend an extended period of time in Venice in her exhibition. So she bought herself a little boombox, and at 2 p.m. every day she stood in the space and she gave a talk. So I guess it depends on each instance, but the kernel of the way that I work, I'd like to think, is about care and trust and the relationship.
Hello. Hi. Am I audible? Hi. So my name is Rushoti, and I am also a non-binary person, so it was great to see my people on the screen. So my question is to do with kind of if the community or anybody, when you work with queer communities and with marginalized communities, if someone has ever mentioned that being part of the exhibition made them feel in many ways objectified, or, I mean, it is literally an exhibition, so I hesitate to call it exhibitionist, but has somebody said that portraying us as part of artworks in an art exhibition has made them feel othered in some way? And if so, as a curator, what do you do when you're working with artists like this, when you're working with models like this, to prevent this from happening?
Look, that's a really great question. My feedback from all the models is they want to do more photo shoots. They found it very empowering. They were pleased to be represented rather than overlooked. And they were represented by another Fa'afafine with lived experience who went through all the kind of cultural protocols, permissions, kind of induction. There were a lot of briefing sessions that we did in Samoa with the community because many had not been part of an art project. It's a small community. And in fact, some of the Fa'afafine who weren't included are really irritated that they weren't included. So I see your point about objectification, but I think the project really was very camp and very celebratory.
Well, hello. Thanks for your presentation. I'm Rituparna Roy, and I'm the initiator of a museum project in Kolkata, Kolkata Partition Museum Project. We just launched a virtual museum last month, and I'm new to the arts field, actually. My question, I hope I can frame it properly. So, what you shared with us is the fact that you've endorsed, celebrated, an artist and a practice which is usually not that well known or does not belong to, let's say, the mainstream. So I was just trying to make a comparison, and I would like your take on it. For example, the Australian novelist Patrick White had done quite a bit in kind of giving focus on Aboriginal people in quite a few of his novels. I wanted to ask you, between a writer and a curator, since you talked about taking care, basically, between a writer and a curator, who do you think is more effective or more significant in trying to put focus on experiences and practices which are not that well known?
Well, firstly, I think they're both really valid modalities, and I wouldn't favour one over the other. And in fact, when I edit publications, I make sure that there is literary commissions. So for the publication on Tracy Moffat, we started with a spoken word poem that was published by Romaine Morton, who's an Aboriginal spoken word activist. And the book finishes with a novella by Alexis Wright, who won a very famous Australian award called the Miles Franklin Award. And it's a novella inspired by Tracy Moffat's work, but she doesn't mention her name. So I feel like the literary and the curatorial are fused and interconnected. I mean, Natasha started with lyrics and with a song, so I don't see those differences as pronounced. In fact, I think they are interconnected. Do you agree?
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Paramita. So I think all the photographs in the exhibition and the shoot venues, if I may, are really green, and it's the sea, it's the Pacific, it's those beautiful beaches, and I know that they are also the centers where probably the environmental crisis is most vivid. I also understand that the concerns about those things run through the exhibition. To most of the world, though, that still looks very pretty. All the blues and greens and the beaches, and they're really beautiful. I'm just trying to understand how much of the exhibition also focused on those concerns, and if you could speak a little bit about the relationship of Yuki and her community and the space where they live in, the island and its environment, and how is that, how does that play a role in her work?
Well, that's a great question, because environmental crisis and climate catastrophe are a key thread of Yuki's practice, but not necessarily in a kind of didactic way. And it's true that on the surface, Samoa and the Pacific does look like a cliche of paradise, but in fact, the experience of sea level rising is higher than anywhere else in the world, coastal erosion, and there's like all these trees that are kind of deforested along parts of the coast. And the exhibition for the Sydney version, we included a workshop that was held for the first time between climate scientists in Samoa and the Whawhawhine community, because the Whawhawhine community is often not consulted when there's a crisis. So when there was a tsunami, even though the Whawhawhine were pulling bodies out of the debris, they weren't actually cared for, they didn't have bathrooms. So to make sure that in some of these policies of climate crisis and emergency documents, that the Whawhawhine community is consulted and is heard. So that workshop, a video of the workshop is in the Sydney version of the exhibition. So there are kind of elements in the exhibition. Also there are Yuki's photographs of fish species. There's 900 fish species around the island of Samoa, and many of them are non-binary. So Yuki has started to do research into fish that are hermaphrodites, that have no gender or that change their gender. I mean, it's already there in nature, so that's one of the highlights in the exhibition.
Thank you. Thank you for the response. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Suryan. I'm an architect and I work as a photographer. Please forgive me for my poor articulation, but I wish to know, don't want to sound too dated, but most of the countries who come with the sort of perspective of this British colonial past, they tend to sort of, there's a particular conditioning that one goes through. So I just want to know from you that how are you seen or accepted as part of the community? Because if I can give an example of, say, the film Slumdog Millionaire, and how Danny Boyle saw the Indian like cultural fabric, they were, of course, it was portrayed decently well, but there were also problems with it. So I just want to understand from you that how does one navigate through that, and how did you see it, and how did they see it, your participation in it?
So are you asking about my positionality?
Yes, and your their perspective of your intervention within it, because we always tend to see something from like a Western compass, where if you do things in a certain mannerisms, it's more correct than it being done in a sort of a local or indigenous manner. And why isn't it happening already in certain areas? And why does one have to sort of intervene to highlight that, or to frame it better, or to present it better, or exhibit it better? Just want to know your thoughts on that.
No, that's a great question, and certainly I don't have lived experience of being a First Nations or a Pacifica person, but I believe that I can work as an enabler, as an accomplice, as an ally, as a supporter, and I also believe in the feminist idea of solidarity and difference. So even though the artists I work with, we might have very different cultural backgrounds and perspectives, we can still work side by side and hold our differences together and work in an interdependent way. Does that answer your question?
To some bits, yeah. Thank you.
I wanted to, maybe we have run out of time, but I actually just wanted to bring up maybe one more question, because I realized that another facet of long-term curatorial work like yours also includes sort of structural changes and expansions of what museum practice can look like. And it doesn't require one to be then the head of a museum. One can also be an educator. One can curate things like biennials. And one of the outcomes which I see within your practice is of publishing, is of research, but also collection building. And in that sense, it is an educational exercise where museums need to often see these large-scale exhibitions so that they can reimagine what they can look like and how they can create publicness. And often that is a slower journey. And so I wonder if there's anything you'd like to comment on that in terms of, how the sort of museums that you have engaged with in terms of making temporary exhibitions or biennials, have you seen them sort of shift their perspectives and their relationship with artists, their responsibility to artists to collect their work and narrate it authentically, responsibly?
Look, that's a really big question. I can only speak from my own experience. I have actively chosen not to work at a museum. I have previously found museums to be very regulated, very bureaucracised, very rigid, and I wanted to maintain an autonomy of practice, so I found myself in a educational space. And so I'm based at an art school, and for a curator it's nirvana, because it's very informal. There's studios, there's workshops, there's kind of access to making and production, So I find it a very lively environment to be working in. But to answer your question about have I seen a shift in curatorial practice within bureaucracies, I guess I try and arbitrate that to some extent. As an independent curator, as you know, you have multiple roles. You're an interlocutor, you're a mediator, you're navigating often conflict in various positions, but also most importantly trying to advocate for the artist and ensure that they are fully resourced as best as possible. So you mentioned in the introduction that I curated an exhibition in Tokyo. This was in the pandemic, so I've never had to install an exhibition via Zoom, and sadly none of us were able to travel. However, what I convinced the museum to do was to acquire the work. Because I thought, if we're not travelling, why can't you use that money? And at least there is some legacy for the project. So most of the works were then acquired by the Tokyo Photographic Art Museum. And I think it's important when you're working with institutions who are collecting institutions to see if there's ways to acquire work. So Yuki's new work, Bertha, has been acquired by the Powerhouse Museum. So there are these added dimensions that people wouldn't necessarily know about, but that ensure that works are then housed and go into collections, and artists then are properly remunerated.
Thank you for that. With this, we conclude